Something to understand is that good girls also help perpetuate the Madonna whore complexes that men have, and a good girl can also help perpetuate what creates what people view as toxic men, right? And I'm going to explain why. And I've had this conversation with many women. I've also been in this situation myself. What can happen is, as a man, you also have to take responsibility for your own choices. And the the choices that you make is, let's say you're young, you don't know any better, or you may be older and you think a woman is a good girl. So because of that, you're going to approach her in a way where you don't emphasize the importance of sexual chemistry and compatibility and sexual attraction. So you're going to be investing in this woman emotionally and with your time and energy, and sometimes your money and resources as well, to get her to a place where she'll be comfortable enough to open up to you sexually. And often this is almost like sex work. Often this almost just works like you're trading love for sex, right? Or at least your time and your energy. And when you do this, a lot of women will just use you for your time and attention. But what some women will do is, if they know they won't be able to just use you for your time and attention, if it doesn't turn into a romantic situation, they'll take that validation, even though they may not be purely sexually attracted to you. So they'll take that validation, they'll take that attention, they'll take all the energy you give them, the love, and then they'll grow an attachment for you that is based off of that love and attention that you give them. And when the attachment is built off of that, instead of also being something that is grounded in sex, right, and in sexual chemistry, then what'll happen is she may even be attracted to you on a physical level, but it's not something that really gives her the tingles. It's not something that gets her pussy wet like that. And every once in a while it can. You learn to tap into her shadow, but it's like when you have that type of mentality to start the situation off, it puts you in a situation where you're already behind the ball. And unless you know what you're doing, when you find yourself in that position, now you're just going to further create that divide. And that divide is you've invested so much emotionally versus how much you've been reciprocated sexually, as far as the engagement of it, or the deepness of it, or the level of explosiveness, or whatever it is that you want out of it. And when you find yourself in that position, it'll often turn out with this is how it turns into a toxic situation. A man will get to the point where he realizes that this emotional investment I'm making in this woman isn't actually helping me, right? And when he gets to that point, he's going to be willing to walk away. And when he gets to that point where he begins to be willing to walk away, the woman's ego will be triggered because she's afraid of the loss of that emotional investment, that emotional connection that she had. And when she gets to that point where she's afraid of that loss of that emotional connection, then she will begin to put out sexually, right? And this works in different ways, right? But this isn't something that you should make a long-term relationship out of. So when she begins to feel that loss of the emotional validation, she's like, okay, cool, let me finally give him what he wants. To a man, this instantly creates a lack of trust. Because if you didn't want it when I loved you, or if you didn't want it when I did all the things that you wanted from me, all the things that you said you wanted, all the communication, all the love and the affection, the attention, when you get all those things from me and you don't want to do it then, but as soon as I'm willing to walk away, now you're putting out, then that'll put a man in a position where either he doesn't trust the woman, or it'll put him in a position where he realizes, or just comes to a place in his mind where says, you know what, maybe I was wrong about the way I went about things. Maybe I was wrong for trying to give this, just trying to love this woman. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the way I need to handle things is make the situation one where you make sure that she's putting in sexually for how much you're putting in emotionally. You just accept the transactional nature of it, and you just understand what comes with it. So you'll put in emotionally with the woman, you'll invest in her emotionally, you'll continue to do that, or you may cut that off completely. And then what you'll do is you'll just, if she isn't sexually reciprocating, then you'll just pull back on her emotionally, right? So every time she pulls back sexually, you pull back emotionally. And when you pull back emotionally, that'll trigger something in her. And if you know how to speak to her sexual shadow at the same time, and you actually get into that energy of being on your toxic shit, what'll happen is you will see different sides of that woman. Like, you'll see sides of that woman where she is much more sexual than you thought she was. And that will further the divide of distrust, because you're like, well, when I tried to love you, you weren't on this, but when I mistreat you, now you're ready, right? But you can rationalize it as not mistreating the woman by just saying, you know, if by the reciprocal analogies, if what she wants out of this situation is emotional investment, and what I want out of this situation is I want both, but since I understand that she can't handle doing both, that I'm just not going to put in more emotionally than she's putting in sexually. And that's how a lot of abusive relationships begin. So I've seen this in different instances. A lot of the times it'll be a man's fault because a man will start the situation like that. You know, as a man, you always have to take responsibility for the part you play in things. But after a situation starts off like that and it starts to head in that direction, a man still desires to feel desired. So subconsciously, you feel the fact that the woman doesn't desire you on a sexual level the way you want her to. And because you feel that, you're still going to want to feel desired, so you're going to find other women to sleep with, right? You're going to find women who actually desire you. And a lot of times it's going to be like hoes, or what people consider hoes, promiscuous women, or just random women, or maybe women who aren't up to par of her level of attraction, or maybe women who are just naturally submissive, or just women who are just, you know, out there. And you're like, okay, cool. Now I can maintain this situation because I still enjoy the emotional aspect of this. And maybe there are other non-sexual things that she adds to the table as well that make her attractive, and then she looks good on paper. Like maybe she looks good to you, and because she's attractive, you'll say, you know what, she looks good on my arm. You know, since she doesn't have that much sexual desire, I can just put her up on a pedestal, put her up on the mantle. Maybe you put in less effort sexually as you see, because usually with this type of woman, if you're putting in too much effort sexually, it's going to turn her off, right? She doesn't want to have sex for that long. She wants to just, you know, have quickies, or just have sex for a few minutes, right? She doesn't want to have sex for that long, or it'll be all about oral sex, or just non-penetrative sex. But I'll say this right here too. Usually with those type of women, a lot of times the women get the best head because they try to find ways out of giving sex. So because they want to find ways out of giving sex, a lot of times those women will learn to like perfect the craft of doing non-penetrative sex. They'll perfect it because, one, if you're having sex from a place or having a sexual mindset that is based in the desire for validation, then what'll often happen is, and this is one positive of it, that's why I don't completely condemn it, because I think you should have a certain level of this in your relationship. Not completely, but a certain level, right? Because there's validational and Scooby Snack pussy is different things that we're talking about. But let's say a woman will be like, okay, cool, I like this person emotionally. Because I like this person emotionally, I do want to see them pleased, right? It's just I don't desire to fuck them like that. So I do want to see this individual pleased. And because I want to see this individual pleased, and because that strokes my ego, seeing them get riled up, they're going to get good at trying to give you some head. And oftentimes that will be a way of giving an apology after an argument, or that'll be a way of trying to smooth things over, or that may just be something for her to show her appreciation to you from time to time. But what you got to understand is, in these type of situations, because that desire for sex isn't natural, then the instances that you would feel the most desire are the instances where she feels the most pressure. So another aspect of why pulling away would increase her sexual desire to a certain extent is because when you don't show that sexual desire for her, that triggers her ego, and her ego still wants to feel desired even though she doesn't desire you on that level. So she still wants to feel desired. So if you do things that subtly reject that woman sexually, then it'll put her in a position where she wants to still feel desired, so she is going to throw it at you. She's going to throw it at you. I've been in that situation before myself. I remember I was dealing with this one girl. And when I was dealing with this one girl, you know, we were hanging out, we were watching some anime, Baki the Grappler. And when we were watching the anime, you know, I had to act because I was trying to, you know, touch her a little bit. You know, we already had that conversation. We were trying to have sex that night. That's what we was talking about earlier that day. So I looked at her and I was like, you know what? I didn't feel like being sexually rejected with trying to escalate things physically, right? So I just said, hey, you trying to have sex? And she was like, yeah. So I was like, bet. So when she said that, I got into my dom energy. Now this is energy that I was dealing with other women at the time. So I had, you know, began having practice with this. I knew what I was doing. So I got up and I said, stand up, take your clothes off. And she acted like she didn't know what I was saying a couple of times. I'm like, what? Now, if a woman is very sexually attracted to you and she's very, like, she's aroused by you, then what'll happen is when you tell a woman to get up, she's gonna get up. and we tell her to take her clothes off, she's gonna take her clothes off. You know, you can get to a certain point. I've been to this point with different women, where if a woman is highly sexually attracted to you, then what can happen is you can go to a woman, not say anything to her. When you're in the room with her, you're alone, you walk to her, not say anything, and then you just grab her by her arm, take her to the corner, and say, get on your knees. And she is going to be ecstatic to do it. But in this instance, she didn't have that energy with him. Because she didn't have that energy with it, and she was like asking me what, or like act like she didn't know what I was saying, I just sat down. I said, you know what, never mind. And I sat down. And I acted like I wasn't even bothered by it. I just, cuddled up next to her like we were before, and continued watching the show and talking about the show. And then she began looking at me a certain way and act like I didn't see it. And then she damn near raped me. And when I say it was a situation where it was a woman where, due to a certain lack of that pure sexual desire for me, there would be instances where we would have sex, and most of the time where we would have sex, even if I gave her like 1-2 orgasms from clitoral stimulation before I put the dick in, it would be a situation where it would hurt when I put it in, and it would take a good 30 seconds to a minute to get all the way in. So because that happened, I was like, well, that night when I sat down and I said forget about it, and I was like, oh, never mind, and I just sat down and I forgot about it. I was like, all right, cool. When that happened, she looked at me, and then she got ready. She didn't even let me eat the pussy that night. She didn't want me to do none of that. She just bent over. I bent over that couch, and when I went in, the dick slid right in. It almost never happened like that. And this woman where I had a good bit of experience with, where things would go the opposite way. So it's just like, what'll happen is that will encourage the idea, that will encourage the energy that exasperates that toxicity in a man. Because when you are in a situation with a woman where she doesn't sexually desire you enough to let love and emotion and the fact that you care about each other increase the desire, and she won't let you just trying to arouse her increase the desire, because she's not sexually attracted enough to you to let things just happen naturally, you're going to get to a place where you either pull back emotionally or you do some type of toxic shit, something that triggers her ego in order to gain sexual access to her at that moment. But just like I said earlier, I had a conversation with different women where they said, this is the Madonna whore complex. This is how it happens. This is how it happens with good girls, right? And sometimes it's not even a man being in a situation where he wants that to be the situation. Sometimes just a man falsely assumes that an emotional connection will automatically carry over into a sexual connection, right? So when a man automatically, not even just emotional, but romantic, an actual romantic connection, when you automatically assume that it's going to carry over, then when it doesn't, and you're already too invested to just leave the woman alone, then you put yourself in a position where you have to figure something out. And when you realize that her sexual desire would be more, her either sexual desire or her ability to do that or desire to do that will come more so from a place of feeling rejected at times than it would come from feeling accepted. And that's more so what sexual integration is. Now, sex in and of itself has really nothing to do with emotions, right? But once you're able to integrate those two things in, then it's a much deeper connection than just an emotional connection or just a sexual connection. It's much deeper, and it's a much stronger bond. But along the way, when you're going about things this way, what you got to understand is the fact that you had to hurt her ego in order for the fact that you had to hurt her ego in a way in order for her to have sexual desire for you, and the fact that she had to feel like you might leave, or the fact that that you felt like she didn't desire you, is going to put both of you in a position where there's going to be a certain level of resentment towards one another. And when that resentment is there towards one another, it's going to make it so that whenever the other person starts to give what the other person wants, it's either not going to be trusted, or it's going to be met with the other person trying to walk away, because it's no longer about the connection or the bond between the two people. That may be a part of it, but it's no longer about that. It's about a game. It's trying to win. It's like, I'm trying to win at sex, you're trying to win at emotions, and it's like, all right, cool, you want to get a certain commitment, and I want to get a certain level of sex. But anytime somebody gives the energy that they want to give that to a certain extent, if it doesn't feel genuine, then you don't want it anymore. So I say, I've been in that situation before where a woman felt like I was wasting her time, right? Or she felt like I was stringing her along. which I wasn't. I made it very clear with her the entire time that we were dealing with each other was that I am completely fine. I'm integrated to a certain point where I desire to have both that emotional and that sexual connection with a person. I'm perfectly fine loving on you, being affectionate. I'm a very affectionate and romantic person. That's just something about me, right? No issue with that. But I know that you're not integrated yet. And I know you're not integrated yet by not only how you deal with me, but how you deal with other men. You know, if how you deal with other men is you just use those men for their attention, and you spend that time trying to talk to them, and then you tell them you're not interested in sex, and you go on all these dates, and then you get along with these men, and then when you get along with these men and you're just like, you say you're not doing anything with them, and I tend to believe it because how certain things can go sometimes. You never know how true that is. You never know how true that is, but I tend to believe that. And it's like when you're in that position, it's like you're just being an emotional vampire. It's like you feel so depleted emotionally inside of yourself that it's not enough for a person to pour into you. It's like you feel so depleted with that when inside of yourself that you need to zap the emotional energy of another person, and while you take that from them, you're unable to reciprocate because that level of loss or that level of lack that you feel is so great that even if you were the type of person who could have a relationship that would be somewhat based on emotion for sex, and those can work sometimes. There are instances where a man has a very good masculine frame. He starts a situation very on his game, and when a man does that, what happens in those situations is if a woman is integrated, then the more she feels loved, the more sexual she is, right? The more she feels loved, the more she feels cared about, the more sexual of a being she is. And those are really some of the best relationships you can have. But expecting that in this day and age where so many people are sexually promiscuous, where so many people have a certain level of sexual liberation, to expect that a woman is that type of woman by approaching her in a way that doesn't show your sexual desire, making sure that there's a baseline of sexual attraction there, then often what's going to happen is you're going to end up in the situation that I'm talking about. And I know plenty of dudes, plenty of women who have been in that situation. But usually a calling card to that is the fact that your sexual desire for each other is going to be more so based on oral sex than it's going to be based off of penetrative sex. Now, I love oral sex. I love to use some pussy. I love it, right? But I also understand that can't be the sexual foundation of your relationship and expect it to work out completely fine unless maybe both of y'all are just not into sex like that. But I know I am. And there are just certain things that I learned, certain things that I studied over the years when it comes to sexuality, certain things that I saw in media. And I know there's some people say, oh, don't worry about that. No, I got my video talking about neo soul. And when it comes to music and different things, one thing that I've realized is with my experiences with women, I do like to have experiences with women that we can embody certain songs that I love. Actually, that's a big thing for me. And not only to embody certain songs that I love, but I'm an artist, right? So as an artist, I like to write baby makers. I like to make songs about sex. I like to make songs about love. So if you're with a person and they're not sexually receptive to you that much when it comes to their energy, not just the act of it, but with their energy, what it'll do is it'll put you in a position where you don't have any positive songs to write about them sexually like that, right? And all you get to do is just write songs somewhat about feeling like you aren't desired like that, and that's where a lot of those songs where niggas be sounding like they begging coming from. That's where a lot of that comes from, because a lot of people find themselves in that situation, but a lot of that is just a man not setting that precedent that he's not going to deal with that woman if she doesn't have that desire for him, right? And women should make sure a man has that desire for her too, because there's some dudes out here who are just gay, and I'm not against dudes who are gay. It's like, I got gay friends. I'm pretty sex positive in my mindset to where I support it. I support the LGBT community. Some people, especially circles that I would be around, they'll probably say that that's wild, because I be around the red pill community. I'm around certain Christian communities, and especially woke communities, like not Christian communities, because I'm not around the Christian communities that are against homosexuality. I like the grace communities. But let's say you're in the woke community and they talk about like butt breaking and different aspects of butt breaking and different aspects of white supremacy and the emasculation of black men and different things that happen in the black community, trauma bonds and those type of things. I do think that those things can work towards creating a situation where a person becomes homosexual, or they taps into their homosexual energy, like a man tapping into his feminine energy, or a man feeling intimidated by the chaos that can be feminine energy at times, you know, a man may say, you know what, let me just go with something that's simple. These niggas is simple. I don't have to worry about, you know, a woman's emotions. I can just deal with a dude, and then you deal with a dude, and it's like, all right, cool, I have to worry about all that drama. But a lot of times it end up being more drama. And oftentimes this can happen with women too, where a lot of times you'll be with women like this, they might, you know, this is how to go. You know, if a woman has this good girl mindset where she sees sex as somewhat wrong, this can often work kind of like a Madonna whore complex, but it can also work like through religion as well. Oftentimes it can be really based in a religious dichotomy, right? So when it comes to the religion aspect of it, if a woman really feels that way about it, then eventually she will feel like a man wanting sex from her is something that's wrong. And because the man wants sex from her, instead of seeing it as something that she gets to partake in, something that she's excited to do, what'll often happen is that she will feel like a man wanting sex is just wanting something from her. So she will want a woman because she feels like at least a woman won't try to overpower her with her masculine energy. And that can happen too. You know, it's like, all right, it feels less abrasive. It feels less harsh. It feels less strong. It feels less rigid. It's more bendy. And a lot of times that comes from a woman's own masculine energy and being unable to set into her own feminine energy in a way that that allows for a man to lead, because of this fear of losing control. But I will say that I do think that someone can truly be homosexual without that being them having some issues. I'm one of the people that think that can happen, and I'm not somebody who's just completely against it. I'm not against it at all. My point of view is that unless you have the freedom to truly be that if you want to, that you're not going to know whether you really are or not. That's the truth. That's the truth. Because sometimes the taboo of something taps into your sexual shadow. And when the taboo of something taps into your sexual shadow, that can create a certain level of desire, that can create a certain level of sexual arousal and excitement, even if you may not naturally be that sexual orientation, or let's say you may bend more towards the being straight. But that's something that can really happen. So that's one thing people don't talk about as much. Most people, they take a strong stance on homosexuality, where it's like it's either the gay agenda and some other stuff going on and just trauma bonds, or it's a situation where it's 100% right all the time and there's nothing that's ever wrong with it. That's not true. You know, a good bit of the people I know who are gay, they were molested as children. But I know some people who are gay and they have loving relationships that are more healthy than a lot of straight people's relationships. I know that's a segue, but that also ties into the Madonna whore complex, right? And this is how it ties in. You know, if a woman isn't integrated sexually, then what'll often happen is she will only be able to be truly sexually triggered by a man who she doesn't deem as relationship material. She has her own version of a Madonna whore complex, right? And some women, they are able to drink the Kool-Aid of their social programming long enough to truly believe that they don't have that type of pure sexual desire, right? They'll drink that Kool-Aid long enough to really think that, and then it'll cause them to be in a position where if the right man comes along, he can speak to her sexual shadow. And if that right man comes along and he speaks to her sexual shadow, then it'll put her in a position where now she becomes aroused without knowing, right? And this is where the sexual shadow world really comes in at times. The sexual shadow world comes in usually a lot through sexual repression. You know, where sexuality is free, where it's liberated. Sometimes certain aspects of the sexual shadow world are people who are actually sexually liberated, but I'm guessing that maybe most of those people are people who had repressed their sexuality and they needed to find an outlet that was just something that wasn't accepted by society. Because the further you get into sexual repression, the further the depths of what you have to do in order to be satisfied go to. Right? And that's just some real shit. The further you get into the Madonna whore complex, the more whorish the whore gets, the dirtier the whore is. So, but also, the more you get into that, the less you're able to view the person who you have an emotional attachment to sexually. So I've had conversations with women where a lot of times a man will be this way with his baby mother, right? Like now that he has a child with her, now that he's invested in her to a certain extent, now he feels like, damn, he doesn't want to see her sexual anymore. He wants to put her up on a mantle. He wants to hide her from the world because he doesn't want her to get triggered. Because what often happens in these situations is, you know, a man will start off with a woman not used to gaining sexual attention from women. And when a man starts off with a woman where he's not used to gaining a certain level of sexual attention from a woman, what he'll do is, when he gets to a point where he's working on himself, or the fact that he's spent enough time with a woman to start understanding women, where he will start receiving attention from other women who actually have that pure sexual desire for him. And what he may do at first is he'll try to encourage her. He'll try to encourage her, like, hey, let's get into this. Let's get into this. All right, cool. Let's try these different things. And if her energy isn't receptive to it because she's afraid that the man will judge her, then what'll happen after that point is that he'll say, okay, cool. Some dudes will lie about it. Some dudes will leave. And then some dudes will just tell the woman straight up, like, hey, I want to open up the relationship. And then when the relationship gets opened up, that woman may understand that man may judge her for experiencing herself sexually with other people because she hasn't fully given into being sexual with him yet. So in a lot of those instances, what'll happen is the situation will get opened up. And when the situation gets opened up, it'll be a situation where the man will start to sleep with other women. He's honest about it. But that same emotional attachment that kept that woman from being able to walk away is that same emotional attachment that will keep her unable to walk, unable to walk away even when the situation is no longer something that she desires. But the man will be able to rationalize it very easily because it's like, well, if you can't keep up with my sex drive, you're not trying to have sex as often or at the same level of intensity that I am, the same level of depth. If you can't keep up with my sex drive, then instead of me putting all that pressure on you, instead of me putting all that weight on you, instead of me putting all of that responsibility on you, let me just outsource this aspect of the relationship, and then we can continue to build the emotional relationship. Now, if you're together when that happens, then a woman may begin to feel jealous. That jealousy, the fact that she smells the scent of other women on you, proverbially, is going to trigger her sexual desire more because it comes from a place of her ego somewhat being hurt in a sense of competition. And when that happens, at first you're going to think that the situation is working out. At first you're going to think it's working out. Like, all right, cool. The fact that these other women are on me now, now she wants me more. So it's like, all right, bet, that's what I'm going to do. That's working. That's working, right? But what happens is along this process, a woman is going to begin to build spite for you. She's going to begin to build resentment for the fact that you're dealing with other women. And it comes from a selfish place, because my mindset on it is if you aren't able to meet somebody's needs in a certain area, you can't be mad at them for outsourcing, right? You can't be mad at them for outsourcing. If they give you the option of outsourcing it first, and then after you agree to it, then they do this. Like, let's say I'm talking to a woman, and this same woman I was talking to, and this happened eventually, where because we were no longer together, it was a situation where I was able to, she would start dating other guys when we weren't seeing each other. I'm like, all right, cool. I wasn't mad about that. As long as you weren't giving them more sexual access than you were giving me, I wasn't tripping on it. I wasn't tripping. It's like, all right, cool. Date those other guys, get that attention, because right now I know how the things are with us, that if I give you too much attention, if I give you too much affection, outside of when we're together, then it's going to lessen your level of sexual attraction to me. So since I understand that, we're going to do this like this. You can go date those other guys. You can go use those guys for their attention. And I'm going to go sleep with these other women. And when I'm sleeping with these other women, I'm going to get the validation of sleeping with those other women for my ego. So it'll help me have the ability to maintain staying in this situation without having to leave because I'm too attached to just walk away. Right? And that's often how those situations work. Right? And that's just real thing. Because this is, I'm going to call this is the video of how good girls contribute to Madonna whore complexes and basically the you're mine but I'm for everybody situation, right? And how that thing works out on both sides. This is both sides of it, right? Because I've seen this plenty of times, and I had a conversation with a woman I was dealing with where she was in a similar situation. So what'll happen is that spite will build up, right? And as that spite builds up, as that resentment builds up for the fact that man is out there enjoying himself with other women, and she's sexually repressed, so she may be avoiding that because she knows he won't be cool with it. And sometimes that's how it works. Sometimes you just open up all the way, and sometimes you just open it up where the guy opens up sexually, but he doesn't date those other women. He doesn't take those women out. He doesn't do any of the extra stuff. He doesn't, give them social validation. All he does is sleep with them. And then she'll have guys who she just goes and dates and spends time with and uses their attention. A lot of guys who are out there dealing with manipulative time wasters, a lot of times that's what it is. A manipulative time wasters are attention whores. And attention whores get fucked too. Attention whores will whore for your attention. The issue with attention whores is just that the more attention that you give them, the less they desire to have sex with you. And I've played that game with different women before, where I would be straight up. I'd be, maybe I met the woman before I learned how to be upfront with women, and I just didn't feel that energy from her. So I would just give her some attention because I just enjoyed having conversations with her. But then if I tried her sexually and then I back off of it, then if I stop giving her any attention, then the usual happen is she'll come back around trying to have sex with me. That's just something I've learned. I call it the simple bitch syndrome. It's different things that come with it. But when we're looking at these type of situations, that spite will build up. As that spite and resentment builds up, it'll eventually come to a point where she's going to try to pressure you into a relationship, right? She either going to be like, I want a relationship, I don't want to do this, yada, 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 or for commitment or for marriage or whatever it is. And if you give into that, the moment that you give in to whatever she's demanding, which is validation, she's just asking for validation because she wants to have the freedom to leave after you give it to her. So that's something to understand. It's like after you give her that validation that she's desiring, that just gives her the emotional, that gives her enough of an emotional battery. It puts a battery in her back. Basically, when a woman is demanding that you give her validation, she's really asking you to put a battery in her back to leave you. That's some wild shit, ain't it? It's asking to put a battery in her back to leave you. And she may go to somebody else to put a battery in her back to do it. But a lot of it is based off of just this feeling of lack. This emotional lack, this lack of substance, right? Because a lot of times in these situations, the woman may not actually want to, I'll say this, like, all right, cool. If your mindset is that, if her mindset would be that I really don't care about the other women, I just want to be in this emotional situation, I'm somewhat asexual. So that's different. If a woman's just asexual, then you may be like, all right, cool. Well, as long as the situation's open, you're somebody who can contribute to my life in a way that can benefit me financially. You're someone who can be in my life and take care of different things around the house or whatever it is. Then it's like, and you can cook, you can clean, take care of all that stuff. I'm like, you know what? That might work. And a lot of people do that. A lot of old school relationships, a lot of the old blue pill style relationships back in the day worked like that, where the woman wouldn't really have sex with her husband for years. They'll be married, and in their process of being married and not having sex for years, she understands that he's cheating on her. But these days, women are a little bit more entitled about monogamy, and not understanding that a lot of what they thought was monogamy through the past was not monogamy. A lot of it was unspoken non-monogamy. It's just that you didn't talk about it. You left that shit under the table. But I'm someone who believes in being honest and upfront about things. Sometimes a woman would rather you just cheat on her and lie to her. Because sometimes a woman would rather you cheat on her. That way, if you cheat on her, she has a way of putting the responsibility on you for what she did wrong. Right? And also, it gives her a pass that whenever she gets tired of you, she can just walk away. But when you're upfront with a woman, it makes it difficult for her to find something that you did wrong in order to give herself an excuse to leave. So she's going to look for things, but when you're upfront about everything, when you're facts, when you're thorough about how you move, then it's a situation where she has to find some type of excuse. So a lot of times that excuse that a woman will find is just to try to get an emotional reaction out of you. And after she gets an emotional reaction out of you, then she's going to use that to justify leaving you, because that lowers her level of attraction. So this is something to understand. And and I've seen this situation with different people. I've been in a situation myself. It happens. It really does. So like when you see situations working out this way, that's why I think that the biology first is really important. The biology first approach is really important for this reason, because there's no guarantee that if you make that type of emotional investment in a woman, that is going to be reciprocated sexually. There is none. You got to stop thinking that, because thinking that is what'll put you in a position where you will, let's say the woman comes to you and she lets you know that she is polyamorous, or a woman comes to you and she lets you know it's different. This is kind of like Chasing Amy, right? To a certain extent. Like if you ever seen the movie, this is where it can mess up. Chasing Amy is where it can mess up. So Chasing Amy was a movie where a dude met a woman. He was a comic book writer, and when he met that woman, she gave him the impression that she was lesbian, that she hadn't been with a man. And because of that, he was willing to make a certain investment in her, right? And in this time where he was willing to make this type of investment in her, he was willing to be friends with her, get to know her, but it was obvious that the attraction was there. So that wasn't going to be able to be avoided, him gaining that emotional attachment in her and him beginning to fall for her. But when she tried to reject him, he wouldn't leave it alone. He pressed on it. And when he pressed on it, which would be like if a woman goes to you and then you're persistent with her, what happened is when he pressed on it, she ended up falling for him. She became emotionally attached to that man, and those two fell in love. And they fell in love, and they was fucking with rappers for a little while. But what happened was he met somebody from her hometown who told him about when she was in high school, she had a threesome with these two dudes from her high school. And when she had that threesome with those two dudes, they had a certain name for it. I forgot what it was, but it was a nickname. She had a reputation. So when that reputation got back to him and he didn't have a chance to process that before he became emotionally invested in the woman, then it made it so that he couldn't control the fact that he was experiencing primal panic about the situation because he was already in love with the woman. So usually when you're in this situation, you have two different things that you can do. There's two different ways that you deal with that type of pain, right? Now, some people, they bite the bullet, but if you bite the bullet, a lot of times it's going to lead to resentment, and that resentment and bitterness is going to cause you to mistreat the woman, right? So usually it can work one of two ways. Either you say, I can't do this, and you bow out, and she'll probably, treat it as if you're a judgmental person. But a lot of times when a man gives off the impression that he's judgmental, it's not because the man is judgmental of that woman, is that she's beginning to show signs that she's a different person sexually than she gave the impression that she was initially. And that impression that she gave initially was part of what made him willing to deal with her. And then usually that comes from a place of not having a truly intrinsic level of non-sexual compatibility and non-sexual connection with that person. It's somewhat transactional, and that's what leads to that type of thing as well. But sometimes it's even worse if it's not, because now you don't mind just being with that woman. But when it feels like it's an investment, there's two ways. So one way is that you just leave the woman alone completely, and the other way is you create a standard, right? You say, okay, cool. You tax her. You're like, all right, cool. You did this. In order for me not to feel sexually inferior to your experiences, then we need to have similar to greater experiences between us. And instead of me judging you for what you did, I'm going to put myself in a position where I can experience what you also experienced with you. That way, I don't feel inferior to your past. Because the fact that you gave me the impression that you weren't that sexual before we began dealing with each other, and then I found out that it was something different than that, I gave you a pass. Like I did, that's kind of how that works sometimes. You give a woman a pass on credit and saying that, I trust that you're saying that you need to get to know me better before we become sexual, or that you need to marry me or whatever it is before you can fully express yourself sexually. And I'm giving you a pass on that, and I'm trusting that as the trust builds, the sexual connection is going to build. So after you give a pass on it, what will often happen is this. If you find out anything different from that, then it's as if you were cheated. It's like as if you were cheated because somebody gave you the impression of this is the reason why this is like this. And then you're like, okay, cool. I agree with this reason. That's why it's not entitlement. It's like, okay, I agreed with this reason. And because I agree with this reason, I trust that logic, and I'm going to take your word for it. But if the reason is something other than that, which is if the reason is just a lack of desire in general, then what will happen is a man will feel cheated. Now, and part of the reason sometimes men go through this or will allow it is, let's say a woman was, sexually repressed. Let's say a woman was a virgin. She didn't have a lot of experience. Let's say it was a situation where maybe a woman had went through a rape before, or maybe a woman was going through a certain health issue that would affect her hormones, or let's say a woman would be going through a situation where she's on birth control, and that birth control that she would be on would affect her sexual desire. Or let's say the woman may have depression, and maybe her antidepressants kill her sex drive. Those type of things, right? And a man will look at those type of situations and say, okay, cool, I want to be supportive of that, and I don't want to be somebody who is just making demands and trying to put pressure on this woman, because I understand that she goes through things, right? And that's a very mature mindset to have. But that is a mindset that you should have after you've already established sexual chemistry with somebody, right? If you haven't already established sexual chemistry in both your compatibility in both your frequency and your desire and your intensity and in the acts and the way they respond to you, like let's say you like to deal with a woman who swallows, you like to deal with a woman who you can have raw sex with, nut in, like whatever it is. And I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying if it's something that you like to do, that if you found out she would do it with somebody else, that you would feel some type of way, then you need to make sure that you're doing those things before you invest in that woman emotionally. That's my mindset on it. That's my mindset on it. Some people may not agree with that, but that's just how I feel. Like, let's say you like a certain type of pictures from a woman, or you like to make home movies, and she's like, oh, I don't do home movies, I don't like that, right? And then you find out she has porn on the internet, or you find out she did it with all her exes, or let's say she tells you she doesn't make home movies, and then her ex sends you a video of y'all having sex or something like that, then that'll mess you up. Now, if it was something that you were also doing and she was open about it, then you may not care. It's like, oh, look at this goofy ass nigga. Look at this goofy ass nigga. But that comes from a certain level of openness, a certain level of understanding, and a certain level of this honesty and upfrontness about how the situation is. So like in the Chase and Amy situation, at first he was going to leave it alone, but she shamed him into believing that he was wrong for how he felt about the situation. But although she wasn't upfront, she was being disingenuous about her sexual past. But my thing is this: if your sexual past, if it doesn't matter, why not tell the truth? If it doesn't matter, why not be upfront about it? And woman will say, because I was afraid you would judge me, or because I would be afraid that you would want to have sex, right? Why would you be afraid that somebody wants to have sex with you if you want to have sex yourself? That's a real question to ask. That's a real thing. Why would you be afraid of somebody wanting to have sex with you if you're romantically involved? That's a real question. So, or let's say a woman say she never came, or she never had an orgasm or something like that, and then you find out she has, or she does, is that type of thing. It's like you give a pass for certain things that indicate sexual chemistry and attraction based off of the explanation that a woman gives you. I would say just to watch out for those things. If it doesn't hit those markers for you, then just tread lightly. Just tread lightly and don't overly emotionally invest, because that's how situations can end up bad, where you feel some type of way. And what else can happen? Like, so in the Chase and Amy situation, at first he was just gonna cut her off, but then after that he tried to have a threesome with some dude he knew and her, because she had a threesome with 2 dudes. And he was like, well, if this is something that you're into, if you did it, then it must mean you're into it to a certain extent. So if you're not doing that with me, then that must mean that you don't desire me on that level. And that's not completely true. She can be in a different place in her life. But do you want a woman whose different place in her life means that she is not going to be sexually invested in the relationship? That's something to think about. A lot of times when women try to reach a certain level of maturity, or they try to elevate their value, or they want to become a quote-unquote good woman or something like that, then their mindset is they need to be more sexually selective and they need to be more sexually reserved. That's not maturity. That's just repression. That's all it is. Now, I don't support that, no matter how old somebody is and they say it, because I just don't think that leads to positive relationships. So let's say after a situation to go this way, a woman will, okay, so he tried to have a threesome with her, and she's like, I'm not in that place anymore, and she felt dirty about it, right? Well, it's like, listen, if you felt dirty about him trying to do that, then how can you expect him not to feel dirty about the fact that you did it already? Now, you gotta think about that. It's like, well, if that's just your past, then why would I want to have less investment from you and be more emotionally invested in you than your past? Unless it was a situation where we were doing everything that I wanted to do, and the things that you did outside of me were things that I didn't want to do anyways. That's also something to think about. So when we're looking at the situation of your mind and I'm for everybody, that dynamic is often something that's perpetuated by both men and women, by them accepting to have a relationship that is transactional based off of emotion. And then when they accept that blue pill mentality, one person may have a certain feeling of lack, and that feeling of lack causes them to need to receive a whole lot of validation in order for it to feel like the other person truly desires them, because they feel that feeling of lack. So like, let's say you're dealing with a woman and you're having sex with her, and you're having sex with her, but because you felt like she didn't desire for you for so long, you'll sleep with her for forever in just a fuck buddy situation, because you need her to prove to you that she desires you. Well, a lot of times along that process, especially if you have that Madonna whore complex, or that type of that transactional mindset about emotional connection, then you're going to get to the point where you feel like, oh, the less I invest, the more I get out of it. And when you have that mindset, then you're going to feel like, okay, because as soon as the person gives you what you want, or as soon as you give them what they want, they treat that as an opportunity to take a break. They treat it as an opportunity to take a rest from having to invest emotionally, right? Or having to invest. So it's like, let's say if it's a man with a woman, after he gets to that point where he's received enough investment from the woman, and he tries to give her some of that emotional investment back because she deserves it, she's going to take that, But because that sex didn't come from a place of desire, because it didn't come from a place of natural desire and lust, he will be in a situation where when he does that, the immediate reaction to her is going to be to pull back sexually, because she's taking a breather from all that investment that she had to make, because she didn't see it as an intrinsic desire, right? And this often happens with men as well. And this is the reason why men stop putting effort into relationships, right? Like, let's say a man takes a woman on a bunch of dates because he wants to have sex with her, and he's thinking that the dates are going to be what causes the sex, and maybe that investment is what causes the sexual access sometimes. Maybe that the emotional investment is. And if it is, then a man will do all he can to get it, but after he get it, he feels like he won the prize, and now that he feels like he won the prize, he no longer wants to put the effort in emotionally or take her out on any dates or do anything nice for her, because that didn't come from a place of intrinsic desire. It wasn't something that he just wanted to do. So you got to understand that as well. These are the reason why people can't maintain the same effort that they put into relationships, because it's on effort. It's not on intrinsic desire. That's why intrinsic desire is so important. Now, as a man goes through that process, now this is where a man can be wrong in it. This is where a man can be wrong. So, and he could already be wrong at the beginning, but a man could further be wrong by after he starts receiving this validation from other women who genuinely desire